Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and we have one young lad with us. Thank you so much. I consider it a privilege and an honor to address such an august gathering, including our esteemed guests joining us online on the occasion of a talk on IIC and the Lodhi Gardens. At the outset, I would like to thank the India International Center for incubating this series on living landscapes, especially the director and the programs division. This series is an attempt to bring the focus on landscapes that are living despite our best efforts to the contrary. This series of talks aims to increase awareness of our environment, and we hope that this will drive a change in our attitude towards the environment. As citizens, we need to step up and be counted in driving that change. This is the third talk in the series. The first one was on the Aravali Biodiversity Park, and the second on the Mehrauli Archaeological Park by Swapna Little, who's here with us today. And we will be continuing the series with many more interesting additions. I am deeply indebted to Ravi Kaimal, Professor Manoj Mathur, and Rahman for agreeing to be part of the conversation. I am hopeful that David and Ethan Stein will also join us online, who are equally accomplished individuals as their illustrious father. And we look forward to hearing from their experiences. The India International Center is an iconic institution and building in an area known as Steinabad due to the fact that most of the buildings in the area are designed by Joseph Allen Stein. Situated right next to the Lodhi Gardens, it continues to inspire architects not only from India but across the world. In Stein's words, there was an attempt to create something which depended upon simplicity and relationship rather than things. So, this is not a five-star appearance in marble and granite, but it's a piece where a kind of relationship exists between the garden and the building, and the water and the earth, and the sky, and the learning at the activities that take place and the things that happen. Ravi Kaimal has had a long association with Stein and continues to research, write, and work on his work. Having interacted with him closely during the planning of the talk, I'm sure he will take us on an exciting journey, which I, for one, am really looking forward to, especially since the weather gods have held up for today. I now invite Ravi Kaimal to start his talk, and I also take the opportunity to welcome Rahman and Professor Manoj Mathur to the discussion. I will introduce them in due course, and I'll just do a brief introduction on Ravi Kaimal. He's an architect with more than 20 years of experience in architecture, construction, real estate, and interiors. He's a graduate of the School of Planning and Architecture, 1987 batch, and has been practicing in Delhi since 1990. He's the founding partner of Kaimal, Chatterjee and Associates, which provides urban design and research services in addition to architecture and interiors. His interest and experience extend beyond architecture to photography, art direction for films, rural education. He's traveled extensively in India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, USA, Spain, Italy, and the UK, photographing places of architectural and environmental significance. He received a UNESCO award for heritage conservation for his work in Rajasthan. I welcome you to the talk, Ravi. Over to you. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, Anuj, for that generous introduction. Um, I would start with a few comments before I start on the presentation. Basically, this is a sharing of information that I have come across. I lay no claims to being the best expert on this subject, or the most knowledgeable, or the one with the most insights or inside knowledge. In fact, there are several eminent people sitting here in our presence who have seen the making of IIC with their own eyes. And if only they would talk sometime. There are others who have worked very closely with Mr. Joseph Stein on several projects and so on. So perhaps the organizers will get around to getting the eminent persons in our presence also to speak sometime. Right now, what I'm doing is sharing glimpses of the creation of IIC, information that I happen to have access to, and this is a story of its creation. The analysis or critiquing or appreciation of its architecture and various elements of it is the subject matter of entire books and talks on its own. What I'm going to share today is the story of its creation. So with that, we can get going. So basically, this is what we're doing. We're looking at glimpses of its creation. There might be gaps in the story. Others might have interesting bits of information to share. But this is what I have had access to. Because architecture doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's highly dependent on the circumstances, the, the resources available, and ultimately the context, the word context in its widest sense, geopolitical, resourceful, material, etc., cultural, of course. So here goes. So this is what we see as IIC, the India International Center, from its access road. And we see a board in front, which has come up relatively recently. For the longest time, there was no signboard at all, but everybody knew what it was and where it was. So how did this happen? How did this get created? How did such an institution come about? So in a sense, this letter is its birth certificate, or somebody might want to call it its moment of conception. This has been formalized. It describes a conversation, a discussion that Dr. Radhakrishnan, the then Vice President of India, happened to discuss informally with you, that is John Rockefeller, a proposal for the establishment of an international cultural center in this country. This is March 1958. This is where it got going. Dr. Radhakrishnan having a discussion with Mr. Rockefeller. So who was Dr. Radhakrishnan? He was the Vice President of India in the 1950s. He was not a routine career politician. He was an eminent scholar. He had taught at the University of Calcutta, Oxford, and Mysore. He is credited with creating and shaping contemporary Hindu identity and for connecting India to the West with its philosophies, especially Advaita. Oxford University, in the memory of the loving teacher of India, set up a scholarship by his name known as the Radhakrishnan Chevening Scholarship. In 1939, Dr. Radhakrishnan was also the Vice Chancellor of Banaras Hindu University. Just as an interesting aside, the famous Indian cricketer VVS Lakshman is the great-grandnephew of Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan. So the true teachers are those who help us think of ourselves. Now, this is where it gets interesting. This is the kind of thing which is at the root of an institution like this. Books are the means by which we build bridges between cultures. He understood this. He was not a speech-making politician. He was a knowledge person, a scholar. And for him, having places for exchanging knowledge, for building bridges between cultures were critical. Not only was he respected in India as a scholar and an eminent knowledgeable person, he was respected around the world to the extent that the King and Queen of England took him out in the royal carriage on a parade through London. These are not very frequent occurrences, but this is an illustration of the high regard in which he was held. This is Dr. Radhakrishnan in Japan. I think the body language of the royal family of Japan conveys a sense of the affection and regard and respect with which he was held and the way he was received by them. So when he went to Japan in 1955, he was there for the opening of the International House of Japan. And this is a sort of brochure or catalog of the International House of Japan when it was ready in 1955. And it describes this. And in a sense, this is what sparked off the thought about having such an institution in India. So Ethan Stein kindly shared this with me. And this is what it is. A place for scholars to gather. It's got staying accommodation, it's got libraries, it's got conference halls, and it's in Tokyo. And while it is filled with such facilities and it is in the city, it is surrounded by greenery. So it has a calm, peaceful atmosphere and a green lookout. So when he approached Rockefeller about funding an international house in India, he said that the days of cultural tribalism are over. We no more have separate cultural universes. East and West have come together, never to part again. And they must settle down in some kind of peaceful coexistence, which will eventually grow into active, friendly cooperation. That is essential for the future of the world, the welfare of the world itself. This is the kind of thinking and the background which led to the creation of IIC. So back to that same letter again. So after having that conversation and getting an encouraging signal from Mr. Rockefeller, um, Dr. Radhakrishnan asked the then head of the University Grants Commission, Dr. C.D. Deshmukh, to write a formal letter to the Rockefellers to ask for their support. So this I had shown earlier also, that Dr. Radhakrishnan happened to discuss informally with you a proposal for the establishment of an international cultural center in this country. So there was a very prompt reply, very positive, and uh, Mr. Rockefeller said that he's keen to pursue the idea of it. Now, then Dr. Deshmukh wrote up a proposal. It's a few pages. I'm showing you some relevant parts in it, basically saying that in the last 10 years, India is an integrated nation and an important crossroads of today's intellectual, cultural, political, and economic thought, a crossroads not only of East and West, but of East and West, and that is of the great nations of Asia and Africa. So going further down, it said there is need, therefore, for a center in India, and very particularly in the national capital of Delhi, which would encourage and facilitate the personal contacts through which wide exchange of ideas and mutual understanding are most easily affected, and which would at the same time give a continued and sustained leadership in intercultural exchange. It is therefore proposed to establish an international house in India to provide such a center in Delhi. So it goes on further to describe various aspects of it. And these are the suggested activities: providing a mutual meeting place for residents, for conversation, for discussion, and so on. Conducting and providing facilities for lectures, seminars, study groups, conference of a non-government, non-official character, which is what we are doing right now. So goes further with the proposed facilities. It lays out an outline of what all we already have over here. I apologize for the readability of the text, because this is photographed from an exhibition which wasn't really set up for, or should I say, quality reproduction. Now, who was C.D. Deshmukh, who was taking the lead in all these organizational and coordination matters? He was the founder president of the India International Center, as it so happened. He was also a linguist, a botanist, a horticulturalist. He was the first Indian governor of the Reserve Bank of India, the Union Finance Minister of India, chairman of the University Grants Commission, and vice chancellor of the University of Delhi, and a very eminent person holding many distinguished positions. So going further, the letters with the Rockefellers continued, and so they decided to proceed further and agreed that Delhi would be the best location for such a center. Now, here, in parallel, they already had a discussion with the government authorities in Delhi for a location for such an institution. And this is the part of the original initial document, which says that a plot of 2.18 acres for the India International Center is sort of designated in Indraprastha Estate. And the government architect, Sri M.M. Rana, who is being consulted informally, has said that the frontage would be adequate. So this was a site which is roughly opposite the power station. People who know ITU and that part of Delhi would be familiar with this. And considering where IIC is today, it's a little hard to imagine um, this institution in that location. However, at that time, that's what it seemed like was going to happen. So uh, things were moving in parallel, moving fast. Once people like C.D. Deshmukh and Mr. Rockefeller were moving ahead, others also started working on their parts. And people were going to visit Tokyo to see the functioning of the Tokyo Center and make a report to Dr. C.D. Deshmukh in this regard. Mahalanobis, just as an aside, was an eminent statistician who set up the Indian Statistical Institute and who was in college in England at the same time as Ramanujan. If anybody's seen the movie, there's a character who plays this. So the meeting ended. This is that initial report with a vote of thanks to Dr. Radhakrishnan for initiating the proposal and lending his personal support to it, and so on. So this is how it gets going. Back to that same letter, again, reiterating. So there's a little bit of this back and forth just to establish some linkages. Now, comparison with Tokyo. As it so happened, as the program developed, it seemed like the Indian Center needed much more space for the facilities that they had in mind. So the Tokyo Center has accommodation for about 60 and a total floor area of about 42,000 square feet, while the Indian Center looked like it was going to have about 45 to 50,000 square feet divided into 3 stories. This was the initial proposal. Now, how did the connection with Mr. Stein happen? Now, this is an excerpt from an interview that Geeti Sen had done. It's in the IIC archives. So the question is, how did this connection happen? Did Dr. Deshmukh approach you? So Mr. Stein replied modestly that Dr. Deshmukh was chairman of the University Grants Commission when he asked me to become architect of the IIC on the strength of the fact that I had done a previous job, the Gandhi Bhavan in Delhi University. It was a small building. Mr. Stein was being accurate, but he was also being modest. Yes, the Gandhi Bhavan was a small building, but he was doing many other things also. A few years earlier, he had traveled to India from the US. This is his steamer trunk. And I believe it has traveled up and down between the US and India. David Stein, I think, took it to college and back again. At least that's what I was told. So this gives you a sense of the time. And when people didn't get to travel by air, the initial journeys were still by ship. And this is an example of that. How did he come to India? He came to India to head the Department of Architecture at the Bengal Engineering College in Shibpur. This is a portrait that people had made over there. I have to thank Rahman for sharing this. And it happened in a very roundabout way. And there's a whole backstory to this, but basically he had to leave the US because of McCarthyism and the circumstances there. And through Mexico and Europe, he finally ended up in India. This is now a little bit of background about his philosophy and his approach. A few years after he had settled in independent India, which is around 1952, American architect Joseph Allen Stein visited the hut in which Mohandas Gandhi had lived some 15 years earlier. Gandhi had established the Sevagram ashram in the center of the country to pursue a pure mode of village living. And Stein experienced what he called a revealing intensity of beauty and brightness there. He would go on to leave with a notable flair for detail, a substantial architectural mark on Delhi. But Stein's commitment to the idea of voluntary simplicity ran through his life and work. This is important to bear in mind. that while working for some of the most prestigious institutions, some of the most eminent and well-funded organizations, and so on, the end result had a kind of simplicity and elegance which um, came from a philosophy of uh, Gandhi and Stein himself. Similar quote of the similar situation from another source. Though the total denial of the city is something Stein never sought, Gandhi's spiritual direction towards simplicity is one which attracted Stein even before he arrived in India in 1952. The material and productive aspects of the ashram are ones Stein advocated as early as 1954 in a house farm prototype designed for a rural setting, designed for the international exhibition of low-cost housing held in New Delhi. Certain elements of Gandhi's approach are the ones Stein feels may currently offer India its best hope for a decent human habitat, as the cost of working and distributing more processed materials for India's enormous population goes further. It says that it will be very onerous, the cost. Now, this actually brought um, Stein to Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru's attention. So, in a sense, this work came on Nehru's radar as early as 1954. This is Bapu Kutir in Wardha, and this is Stein being quoted. To visit the mud hut at Wardha, long occupied by Mahatma Gandhi, is to experience a revealing intensity of beauty and rightness, seldom to be seen in even the most technologically evolved products of Scandinavian design. It also demonstrates that self-help and indigenous materials are a personal resource whose possibilities are still pertinent. So this is an example of simplicity uh, in design and simplicity in materials, yet the end result, I think to most eyes here, would be quite pleasing. So before IIC, he had already been working on interesting and prestigious projects. He was designing the Indian Mountaineering Institute, and this is a photo of Joseph Stein with Tenzing Norgay in Darjeeling, I believe. And there is a story, one of these apocryphal architect stories, that the building was built the wrong way around. So I guess somebody needs to follow up that. So worth mentioning. This is the chancery of the Australian High Commission. This was also happening around the same time as IIC. So it's not that he was an unknown entity. He was already working in Delhi on prestigious and high-profile projects. This photo was taken by me. I had helped organize this meeting. In this, you find both the sons of Mr. Stein. That's Ethan on the left and David on the right. And that's Professor Chusid, who's been researching the work of Stein and in the process of writing a book on him.
When was this photo taken?
6th January 2020. Why?
So I just was wondering whether it is more famous to Stein or it's the old photo. Thank you. Can you continue?
So this is photo from inside out, again showing the connection to the garden and how important the link to the garden and the gardens themselves are in the architecture of and the design work of Joseph Stein. So a lot of the trees and vegetation that you see were apparently chosen and planted by Margaret Stein herself. David and Ethan sort of relived parts of their childhood when we visited together over here, because they saw many of these things coming up and the trees being planted. So this image shows many of the elements which continued in Joseph Stein's work in the Delhi region. The Delhi quartzite stone walls, the use of jalis, it's a exposed concrete, combination of textures of different kinds coming together, creating, well, most would say a very pleasing combination. This is the Triveni Kala Sangam, which is also happening around the same time. There are some who think that this is actually a finer piece of architecture than the India International Center. And I think it's a good debate to have. A very fine piece of work and generations of Delhiites have enjoyed going there for the theater and for art shows and for various activities. So this was for a family, a husband and wife, who had a lot of India-US connections. Now, again, Gandhi Bhavan, which was mentioned earlier on. So these are drawings of Gandhi Bhavan. I doubt if many people would have seen this. This is the plan. These are some views. I had to tweak the images a bit to make it more visible from the original faded documents. Here's another one. This is in the Delhi University area. Well, as I go further, there are some things which exist and some which don't exist. So many things are worth researching. So going further, having engaged him for the project, did Dr. Deshmukh outline certain conceptual ideas in planning the center? No. Dr. Deshmukh gave complete freedom to the two of us to plan the program of the IIC. Don McLean, who was cultural personal advisor, and myself. The program, that is the layout and size, was the result of our having studied the previous international house in Japan and meeting with the director there. And I had mentioned about the site earlier. That comes back to the conversation. So here he mentions that this place took its shape on its rather unique site thanks to Pandit Nehru. What is the story? So originally, the site had been earmarked for the IIC near Azad Bhavan, which is at ITO opposite the power station and not too far from railway tracks. I did not like that site. So one day when I was sitting in my office thinking of what to do with it, an architect friend of mine came in and asked what I was doing. I was thinking of what to do with the site, which is not very good. He said, why don't you do something about it? I spoke to Dr. Deshmukh, who said, well, suggest another site. So I suggested two sites. One was near the old fort, Purana Killa, which would have formed a very dramatic backdrop. And his good friend and fellow great architect, Habib Rahman, was designing the Delhi Zoo at that time, which is also in the vicinity with a fantastic backdrop. Purana Killa, which is occupied by refugees who are about to be moved out. I suggested that would be an excellent site for the International Center and associated activities because it was a very big site. So again, this is that reference. Imagine what it would have been like in that site. So I suggested the site where there was a housing colony of the Lodhi estate bungalows and a PWD inquiry office. I said the inquiry office was obsolete and suggested that we ask for that for the IIC. That was only about half the size of the other site. There's an important point here. Dr. Deshmukh showed this site to the Prime Minister. The PM thought it was a good idea, but he said it was not big enough. Take these two adjacent bungalows also, and that's how we got this site. So these are interesting background anecdotes about how a project comes to be. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It needs active involvement of the architect. You have to go beyond the brief, literally look at the big picture and see what can be done. And of course, it needs supportive patrons and supportive team members. So this is an image in the back of a picture that Ethan Stein shared with me. This is the only image I've come across till now of what used to be on this site before where we are sitting came to be. So you can see that it's nothing special, quite an ordinary nondescript kind of structure, not being put to any great use either. So no great loss. So the current site, the site is a tract of 4.6 acres lying outside the eastern boundary of Lady Willingdon or Lodhi Park. Visually, Lodhi Park and Centre Grounds are one site, separated only by a low wall which demarcates their common boundary. Again, an important point to keep in mind the way this has been designed. There are also two exceptionally interesting dome structures within sight of the center's ground. In deference to these monuments, the height of the buildings for the center has been kept below the level of the base of the domes of the nearby monuments. So that was very much part of the conception of the design and the lines of sight. This is where he gets going, starting to sketch out how the building would be. And as architects, I think some of us find these to be the most fascinating materials. Correct me if I'm wrong, present company. And you can see the thought process starting, like in the center in Tokyo. You start off with some parallel blocks for each of the activities of the center and try and see how they link up. The site is an odd shaped triangle. So it starts off in this manner and it continues. Then some of those blocks start curving and lining up to make use of the shape of the triangle. And goes on, exploring various options, how things comes together. The dining block starts becoming more prominent as a kind of hub or a link between the different wings and blocks. More explorations. Finally, we have a doodle which kind of approximates what we have right now and seems kind of right. Then the volumes start taking shape. This gives a sense of the design intent. The idea was that it would connect up visually with the background, the park, and the monuments. And the roofs start echoing some of the shapes. The architectural character of the buildings resulted from adherence to a design approach, which may be stated briefly to seek the character of the solution in the nature of the problem. This, to some extent, is key. And people in the present company who are teachers could use it almost like a commandment about how to approach a design situation, to seek the character of the solution in the nature of the problem. So it goes on to talk about all the aspects and integration functions and integrating function, site, materials, landscaping, etc. The objective of this approach has been to derive an architectural character and forms which, while freely utilizing modern techniques and the most appropriate materials, will achieve a timeless concord with the site, yet also indicate that the event of construction belongs to the latter half of the 20th century. So continues in this vein, in this approach. Materials start appearing, stone wall, glass and jali, etc. More shape explorations. Again, I'm just repeating this as we go further. Except for the dining rooms and lounge, which have been placed to overlook a fine view of the monuments, all the main rooms, office, library, guest rooms face approximately north-south, the most preferred orientation in the latitude of Delhi. More shapes emerging. Even in the elevations, there are three layers which constitute the elevation. And these notes kind of describe how they come together. Further details, the hexagonal room in which we are sitting has emerged. We are sitting 2 floors above this, but this is where the shape comes from. It integrates 2 different wings meeting at an odd angle. Other elements also started coming in. Here is something which may not mean a lot to most people, but architects love it, the design module. So it's in the design, it's not visible in the final result in a sort of obvious, explicit manner, but this forms the key to a lot of the design decisions and a lot of the visual harmony that comes out as a result of following a certain discipline of the module. These are the details of the module. More details. This is the other wing above the library. the beginnings of the auditorium, the initial calculations, calculating the, the space requirements, the essential dimensions, uh, etc., and the basic configuration of spaces. You can see the stage. You can see at the bottom that 300 seats at 11 square feet per seat, and so on. The rough area calculations and the rough dimensions are coming out. The shape emerges further, and that is also becoming a hexagon. And this is how it emerges. So in this one drawing, you can see multiple aspects of the hall being described and communicated very clearly. And I often show this to, well, the next generation who are, how should I say, computer natives, that you don't need a lot of technology to be able to make a highly expressive, communicative drawing which can convey multiple kinds of information at the same time. The roof detail is there along with the floor seating detail. The lounge conveys a sense of the verandas which wrap it, and we are sitting on top of the second floor. Yeah, even the table placement is there. This is a plan of the lounge. This is the reflected ceiling plan, basically the roof, showing the triangular coffer grid. Now, it's time for specifications. Specifications have started. Various materials are being listed, and the process continues. These are some of the details. The foundations, even the design load on the soil has been mentioned, on the basis of which the structural calculations would have been done. So walls, random rubble, etc. Stone chips, plastering. The design of the hostel block, how the individual rooms are laid out, how they fit into the curve. A sketch, a visualization of the double room. While the process was going on, people were coming to see how it was happening. The Rockefellers dropped in and they visited Mr. Stein's office in Asif Ali Road. And here's a photo. Finally, the overall design was ready. And it's pretty much close to what we see right now, except for a couple of bits at both the corners, which I'll come to. Here's another one showing drainage lines and so on. This is a photo of the model from the other side from which we have been viewing the drawings. The water body, which is outside this building in which we are sitting right now, at that time extended much further to the left. In fact, the reason why there's a little bridge near the current bar area is because the water body continued under that. It might seem a bit incongruous to go and look at it right now, but this was the original reason, and this also functioned as the cooling tower, so to speak, for the air conditioning system. It was a cooling pond. More photos. The Asif Ali Road address is mentioned. Model of proposed building, India International Center. Detail showing restaurant and lounge. So basically, we are sitting under this top floor with this sort of curved roof. That's where we are sitting right now, having this conversation. While he was designing the building, Mr. Stein was also designing the logo of IIC. So these are the early sketches and how it progressed. In fact, in the brochures of 1960, you can see this very same logo on the cover of the brochure of IIC. But by 1962, it had evolved to become this, which is over here. And subsequently, it evolved further. So things were proceeding. This is a newspaper report about the foundation stone laying. Considering that the inspiration was from Japan, it was most appropriate that a Japanese dignitary lay the foundation stone. So Crown Prince Akihito, who subsequently became Emperor Akihito of Japan, would be coming to lay the foundation stone. And this institution has been referred to as a super university. It was a place for scholars. It was a place for exchange of knowledge and information. So this was the way people looked at it at that time. The Rockefeller Foundation is contributing a large part of the 45 lakhs to be spent on this Indian center. This is the invitation card for the foundation stone ceremony. I wish the screen was, the lighting was a little clearer. Could we switch off the end lights close to this? Yeah. So, oh, sorry. You can leave these lights on. At this end, you can leave. So, over me, you can leave it on. Okay, fine. We'll just proceed. Okay, so here it is. Here is Prince Akihito laying the foundation stone of IIC. This is right next to the reception of the hostel block. And you can see it over there. That's him. Next to him, standing behind him is Princess. And behind him, you can see Pandit Nehru. So this is how it was being laid, and this is how it is as of today. This is the same stone touched and installed by Prince Akihito. Now, this is just before the same ceremony. Over here, you can see Mr. Stein. That's the contractor, Tirath Ram Ahuja, welcoming the princess. And this is the old government housing at the back. So that's Tirath Ram Ahuja, the main contractor. And since the site was sort of in his custody, he's doing some welcoming gestures. And next to him is C.D. Deshmukh and Crown Prince and Princess and Pandit Nehru. And there's a bust of him on the ground floor. And this is who he was. So he was, in a sense, project manager, pusher, enabler, facilitator, everything, who sort of made this project happen. This is from the brochure at the inauguration. It's a page by Tirath Ram Ahuja describing all the works that they have done in the building, which is pretty much most of the work on the building. All the items are listed. These are many of the items of work. The photos, precast cladding tiles. These were not ready-made tiles. These were concrete bits and panels made of embedded chips in concrete. These were the coffer slabs being made, which are seen in the roof of the lounge. This is how those coffer slabs were being made on site in molds, and how they were being brought together, a mix of precast and in situ RCC components. This is from above. Some detail of the reinforcement, how it's coming out in a radial manner. Now, beam shutters, complete with bottom and side blanking, tongue and grooved. Fabricated assembly on the ground and lifted in position between columns. I think this would be a rare occurrence in today's day, but this is the kind of level of detail that Mr. Stein went into, and it shows in the quality of work that happened, that the shuttering had tongue and groove charts. Construction, how it's coming along. And you can see that looking out over the auditorium into the background in the southeast direction, basically you only see trees. Most of South Delhi as we know it cannot be seen. It's just trees and countryside stretching out into the distance. Of course, Lodhi colony was coming up on the right of this particular view, and other colonies were coming up, Lajpat Nagar and so on. But basically, there were no high rises and there were no large buildings. The dome of the auditorium coming up. These are electrical conduits laid in situ for the lights and such like in the roof of the auditorium. Now, while the building was going on, there was also a garden committee. C.D. Deshmukh, being a keen horticulturist himself, chaired it. And as it happened with many of the other projects, including the Australian High Commission and so on, Mrs. Margaret Stein was also a member of the garden committee and an active participant. The interiors, furniture and furnishings were done mostly by Ahuja Furniture, known as Ahuja Furnishers, Ahuja and Company. So it says over here, part furnishing of the India International Center.
We'll wait for the discussion at the end, please.
The Delhi area is extraordinarily rich in good building stone, ranging from the hard, rough textured quartzite of the local hills to the fine stone of Jaipur, Agra, and Kota. For perhaps the first time since the construction of the Rashtrapati Bhavan and Secretariat building in the 30s, these locally available materials are used as an integral part of the building concept. Extensive use of varicolored local quartzite as chips setting into the precast concrete and as coarse rubble for bearing walls is a consistent repeated element in the design of the center. This was seen also in the Australian High Commission, and sometime, if opportunity permits, Ethan Stein has an interesting story about this. The southern side of both the program block and the hostel wing is shaded by screens of fire clay tiles. Perforated walls, precast units of jali, are of ceramic tiles in the traditional Delhi blue. I believe Raja Tiles has gone on to make a whole business riding on the reputation of what they did over here. The blue of the jali tiles is repeated in a softer hue in the balcony railings, which are naturally weathered copper and clad tubing, basically using materials for their properties, color and texture. So, building getting closer to completion. This is an illustration of some of those elements that were talked about just now. The quartzite stone, the blue jali, the exposed painted concrete, and so on. It's unlikely that such a building would have been there anywhere else except Delhi. So this has been described also by Professor Chusid. Stein's integration of Fordism, which is mass production of parts, like in the coffers, the sort of scalloped canopy over the entrance area and so on. Integration of Fordism with traditional crafts at the IIC as seen in the mix of concrete precasting assembly with handmade tiles and stone encrusted panels was a perfect expression of India's technological and social position after independence, at the cusp between Nehruvian and Gandhian visions for the country's future, between industrial modernity and rural handicrafts. An expression of various philosophies coming together very harmoniously. Again, it's about the site, which I had mentioned earlier. And the final plans were then developed containing approximately 82,000 square feet from the 50,000 square feet that was discussed earlier of floor space, including verandas and balconies, exclusive of basements. In the cost of the India International Center, including all construction, etc., is comparable to sort of similar buildings in the area. The quality of finished materials have been largely made possible by the efficiency of the structural design, and which resulted in substantial savings in the amount of cement and steel required. The cost per square foot of roof space is rupees 38 and 80 paisa not including air conditioning. The cost of air conditioning is approximately rupees 10 per square feet. This is, I think, amusing for those used to current day figures. The fabrics for the auditorium curtains were specially designed and woven by Mrs. Nelly Mehta. Ritin Mazumdar, who did a lot of work with Fab India, designed the blocks for the printed fabric, and Mr. Daljit Singh has been most helpful regarding furnishings. So these are all, a lot of these names have been forgotten in the larger narratives, but they were all eminent, talented, accomplished people in their own right. Margaret Stein developed the interior color arrangements and selected and coordinated the furnishings, as she did with the Australian High Commission and many other projects. So this describes many of the others who contributed significantly, including Vishnu Joshi of the Architect's Office with the assistance of Mr. Khetia, or also of the Architect's Office, who had been in charge of the structural design of the buildings. So Mr. Joshi has also been responsible for the supervision of the structural work. A lot of the credit for the exposed concrete shapes and elements that you see apparently is to the credit of Vishnu Joshi for getting it done so well. Mr. J.R. Bhalla did a lot of the on-site coordination and coordination with the contractors and so on. And Pritpal Singh of the Architect's Office has been responsible for detailed drawings, etc. I would also like to mention that Mr. Prem Chaudhary, you used to work with Mr. Stein, was somebody we would have liked to have gotten for this talk, but apparently his health does not permit him. So finally, Inauguration Day, on the 22nd day of January 1962, the center was inaugurated by Dr. Radhakrishnan, Vice President of India. Not the Prime Minister, not the President, the Vice President. And here he is honoring the architect. This is the architect with the initiator of the project. I think the body language and the expressions convey the goodwill. And as should be done more often, a stone was laid into the building, describing the dates and the architect. So we come back to that site plan. There is a lost pavilion at IIC, which I didn't know about, even though I've been visiting this place for many decades. And to the left of this, you'll see that there is a flowery looking feature. And here is a photo of it. Yeah. And this fine thing apparently was built. It existed. And now it's not there anymore. So therein lies a whole mystery and a story for people to chase and work out. How nice it would have been to sit in the dining hall and look out at this, or maybe go sit in it. After it was finished, here's a lovely photo of Mr. Joseph Stein standing in the auditorium, and that boy sitting in front of him is his son, Ethan Stein. And this has been taken by an eminent photographer and an old family friend of the Steins. And, nice feeling. Here's another feature that a lot of people don't know about or haven't even noticed. This exists. This hasn't vanished like that other pavilion. It's called the Gandhi King Memorial Plaza. And this is a bird's eye view of a part of what is now known as Steinabad. That is the monument in the distance. This is IIC as we know it. And on the left is the Ford Foundation buildings. We usually drive in like this, get dropped off at the entry porch, and then we go about wherever. In IIC, this is the auditorium. So before coming up to the auditorium, on the left is this empty space, which is kind of triangular in shape in plan. And that's also the reason why this road on the other side curves around and goes. Because apparently once upon a time, this land was in the possession of the Ford Foundation. And after discussions, they agreed to give it for a purpose which would keep the land open and also serve as a testament to the goodwill between the people of the US and India, symbolized in the sayings of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. So this is an image of it. And this is a plan of the area of the plaza. And here is this feature, which is shown in the previous photograph. Roughly 4 squares in plan, 4 square cylinders. This is how it's shaped up. This is the design as created by Mr. Stein. And it's got sayings by Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi in English and in Hindi. Each one of them carry one, either in English or in Hindi. So this is the saying. True peace is not merely the absence of tension, but it is the presence of justice and brotherhood. Martin Luther King. For us today, there can be no higher sacrifice than to forget distinctions of high and low and to realize the equality of all men. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Martin Luther King was extremely inspired by Gandhiji, and Gandhiji in turn was inspired by various American thinkers like Thoreau and others, and the Indian Constitution, and Dr. Ambedkar owed a lot to the American Constitution. Coming to the other very few. Yeah, I know, but your fault. So coming to the Lodhi Gardens part, Lodhi Gardens was set up by the British, and it was called Lady Willingdon Park at that time in 1936. This gate is on the northern side because what we now know as Lodhi Gardens was on the southern edge of the city at that time. So you don't find a ceremonial sort of ornate gate on the southern side. It's on the northern side next to the roundabout. So over here, we have some information very near that gate. And if you can read it, it sort of says that the present landscaping was done by Joseph Stein, the architect of the India International Center, and modified by a group of Japanese landscape designers. So this is interesting because in all these decades and all the talks with everybody, I, for one, have not been able to locate any information about these Japanese designers. So Mr. Stein himself was deeply interested in landscape, nature, and so on. So he did get very involved with those aspects of a project, not only the building. Here, these are drawings related to the landscaping of the Ford Foundation. And in that regard, he decided to do something for Lodhi Gardens by getting Ford Foundation to invite his old friend, the landscape architect Garrett Egbo from San Francisco to Delhi. So he and Garrett Egbo had worked together throughout the 1940s. And as his son David says, if there's one word that would characterize what he was attempting to do, it was humane in his architecture and everything else. So as quoted elsewhere, they worked together and they were personal friends. And I think the Stein sons also stayed with Garrett Egbo when they went to study in Berkeley. So in various sources, it is mentioned that Garrett Egbo had worked on a master plan for Lodhi Gardens along with Joseph Stein. And Joseph Stein was instrumental in getting him here because the NDMC didn't have funds for bringing over an eminent landscape architect. So Joseph Stein spoke to the Ford Foundation, and with the excuse of doing the landscape for the Ford Foundation, he was able to shoehorn in Garrett Egbo's working on for a master plan for Lodhi Gardens. So this is about Garrett Egbo, and even in information about him and his firm's work, New Delhi, India, Lodhi Park, and the Ford Foundation headquarters is mentioned. And in his words, design shall be dynamic, not static. Design shall be a real, not axial. Design shall be three-dimensional. People live in volumes, not planes. So this is from an article in the Indian Express soon after Mr. Stein passed away. It's mentioned over here, quoting with reference to information from the Stein family, that he had brought over Garrett Egbo to work on Lodhi Gardens and saved Lodhi Gardens in a sense from the ceremonial multicolored fountains that are often placed in other public spaces. So Stein continued to be involved with Lodhi Gardens throughout his life. In fact, the area around Lodhi Gardens is known among some architects as Steinabad. Most of the buildings here, IIC, Ford Foundation, UNICEF, WWF, and the IICNX were designed by Stein or his associates and people that worked with him. And the neighboring Habitat Center and the CII building were also designed by him. So in the popular sort of public imagination and space in Delhi, one often finds mentions of Stein and his work and its planting. Here's an article that I had written along with Sudeshna Chatterjee soon after he passed away. The road next to where we are sitting is named Joseph Stein Lane in his honor. And here is a senior journalist saying, Joseph Stein Lane in Delhi is the only road in the city named after an architect. There should be more. Architects, especially public-spirited ones, help make a city. I think we can support that. Here's a little post by David Stein, part of the decoration at the Mandi House metro station in New Delhi, a tribute to my father and the Triveni Kala Sangam art school that he designed. Very gratifying to see. There should be more such. The Indian Postal Department put out a stamp in the honor of Joseph Stein on his 100th anniversary in Centenary 2012, featuring India International Center. Back to the sketch, the initial conception. And this is how it turned out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you so much. I'm sorry for making you speed it up a little bit, but we have some guests who have to be given some time, and I'm sure the audience will have a lot of questions. I have some with you. I'll just introduce you briefly to Mr. Rahman and Professor Mathur so that we can get in with their comments. Rahman has given a very short bio, but he's a very accomplished person. He's a photographer and a cultural activist. He's an architectural photographer and has curated exhibitions and lectured on Delhi's modern architecture at the KNMA, Photo Inc. in Delhi, and MoMA in New York. Thank you for joining us, Ram. Professor Mathur teaches at the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, where he has headed the departments of architecture, industrial design, and urban design. And he has designed prize-winning public projects like the Sai Baba Temple Complex, Shirdi, the AIMS Flyover, New Delhi, and the FDDI, Noida. He continues to inspire generations of architects, and he has been my teacher for almost 4 decades back, and I continue to learn with him while teaching alongside him at the School of Planning and Architecture. Welcome, Professor Mathur. Ram, we'll go over to you first. Would you like to share your thoughts about the presentation, the living landscape of Lodhi Gardens, since you've been associated with this area as such? And also, there was one of Stein's building which was demolished along with the Hall of Nations in the Pragati Madan complex.
That's right.
Yeah. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ravi, for presenting a lot of very interesting archival material in a short space of time. I try and be brief myself. My presence here is really because of my father, Habib Rahman, who met Joseph Stein when Stein within the first week of Joe's arrival in Calcutta in 1952. And Joe told me that when he was in France, when Richard Neutra had approached him, talking about this offer of going to teach in Calcutta, the week that he was going to leave, he opened a Newsweek magazine and saw a report of the first Miss India. And that first Miss India happened to be my mother, Indrani Rahman, who was actually a classical dancer. And in that report, Jo read that her husband was an Indian architect who had graduated from MIT. And Jo said that within the week of his arrival in Calcutta, he met my father. And that's where this very close and intense connection started between our two families. My father, by the way, was at that time designing the Bengal Engineering College, which was a huge project in Shivpur in Calcutta, where Jo became the head of the architecture department. Both moved, my father was brought to Delhi by Nehru in 1953 and helped oversee the housing exhibition in which Ravi had shown, talked about the buildings that Jo had designed there in 1954, the site of what became Pragati Maidan. But more interestingly, Mrs. Sridharani, whom we had a very close connection to also because my mother was a dancer and had worked with Mrs. Sridharani in Connaught Place when she started Triveni before getting that site. Mandi House should also be remembered when we're talking about this whole issue of Nehru and Nehruvian modernism in Delhi. Most of those sites around Mandi House, it was Nehru's idea that that become a cultural hub. And he leased these government sites to the various ladies who were setting up these cultural institutions. So Mrs. Sridharani got the site for what became Triveni. And she had known my parents and asked my father if he could design Triveni. And since he was a government architect, he couldn't do private projects at the time. And Jo had just moved to Delhi, and Sundari told me that it was my dad who introduced them. And that's how Triveni happened, which is an interesting part of architecture history. The other aspect of, the design elements, Ravi's talked about the quartzite stone. Now, when you look at what is happening in the late 50s, early 60s in Delhi, Rabindra Bhavan is being designed by my father on the other side of Mandi House Circle from Triveni, very much under supervision of Nehru, who hated his first design, which was a very institutional design for the building. And Nehru, had a temper and, got very angry and yelled at my father saying, this has nothing to do with Gurudev. And, you've done Gandhi Ghat, you've done the Maulana Azad Memorial, which have the Indian spirit in them as modernist structures. Why can't you do this? Anyway, that's how the design evolved. And I must credit architect K.T. Ravindran for this insight many years ago. Rabindra Bhavan was finished 1961, IIC 1962. Now, as I said, our families were very close. Every weekend, we would go driving in our two cars to all the monuments around Delhi. At that time, they were all surrounded by fields, and primarily the Tughlaq monuments, all of which had used the Delhi quartzite stone extensively. So both Jo and my father, looked at that local material of the quartzite, and both Rabindra Bhavan and IIC ended up using a huge amount of that quartzite in their structures and the design. KT came up with a very interesting notion that the layout of IIC actually reflects the layout of Rabindra Bhavan, with the two buildings separated from each other, the administration block in Rabindra Bhavan and the exhibition block in Rabindra Bhavan. with a covered walkway in between. Now, the reason that happened in Rabindra Bhavan was there was a ruined mosque and graves in that central site. I would have to research this, more in detail, but I think that site may have belonged to the Waqf board. And perhaps it was Maulana Azad when he conceived and set up the academies, persuaded them to give the land for this building to be built. So that's how the Rabindra Bhavan layout happened. Now, Katie said, that there's such an amazing reflection between the layouts of these two buildings. Now, given the intimacy between these two architects, one never knows, was one influenced by the other, because they would be discussing design ideas all the time. I think that's really the most interesting thing I can give you in terms of what happens with IIC. But going back a little bit into Lodhi Gardens, I remember as a child, we lived in Sujan Singh Park, and I would go with my nanny, my ayah, Chand Banu, to Lodhi Gardens. And at that time, it was not landscaped. It was still a totally natural ground with a few designated pathways, and the portion where the bridge is, and which became the sort of formalized water body, didn't exist. It was a natural slope, and every time in the monsoon, that would fill up with water. And obviously it was, natural channel which had been blocked at some point when New Delhi was built. So I remember that, it was a grassy slope going down to this natural water pond where I would sail my toy boats. This was, in the late 50s, early 60s, as far as I remember. There was also a very beautiful little enclosure. That gate is still there. It was an almond garden with beautiful flowering trees, white and pink, that used to blossom seasonally. The intimacy, I think, with the families was very close, and it's kind of a rare connection with architects. And after Margaret Stein died, Joe wrote a letter to my father. He used a small typewriter. It was not a handwritten letter, which said to my father that I regret to this day that we never became partners and, were never able to formally work together. And I asked my father about that, sort of startled. And my father said that when Joe came to Delhi, he had asked my father to be his partner, but my father had his government job, was very worried about working in the private sector, because he was, his cultural attitude was working for the government. He would have a chance to do more public projects on a scale that would never happen in public. So that partnership never happened. Also, the landscape of Lodhi Gardens is, I think, an important point to mention. Margaret Stein was very, very much involved. And if you see the IIC now, sorry, I meant the landscape of IIC, when you see it from the road, which is now Max Miller Bhavan, and you look towards the building, that open area from the road to the buildings has been left clear of planting, other than a few handful of trees, which were, designed along with the building. The landscape was designed. And that kind of saved the view of the character of the building. And you see the rest of Delhi, including in front of Purana Killa or Rabindra Bhavan, this whole idea of planting giant trees along the periphery of every site, where these trees grow up huge and you don't ever see the building anymore from the street. So you lose that sense of the character of the site and the building. And this is something which, nobody has really thought about properly. I remember seeing Purana Killa from the main road when you would drive towards it as a child. And you saw that huge Qila standing at the end, soaring up. And now with the massive amount of trees which are planted along the road, you don't get a sense of that Qila at all. And you only glimpse parts of it when you manage to get through. So these are just a few of the points that I thought, may be of interest.
Thank you, Ram. Thank you so much. We'll go over to Professor Mathur now. We've done a number of, Stein has done a number of interviews. David has spoken so much about him. And he spoke about the Indian style of modernism, and he was not very happy with the way it was going. He says that architecture was becoming very interior oriented. And he was, at that point of time, 100 schools of architecture. He thought that maybe a new architecture would emerge. Now, with close to 400 schools of architecture, what do you think about his thoughts then, and what are your views on the subject, sir?
I think Joseph Stein has already given us the primer for what the new Indian architecture should be, and it's like Ravi just told us that it was in 1962, and this building has been standing for another 62 years, and it's fresh as ever. It's just like it would have been in 1962. So I don't think anything that we got then needs to ever be changed from that. I would just share some thoughts which are in a way posited quite diametrically opposite to where Ravi has taken us. So it was Ravi's expose was like something like a drone shot in which he was telling us about the big picture, all the things which happened in the making of the IIC, how it actually came about and all that. So my little bit here is like a worm's eye view. It's a view from under the grass and looking up. I happened to be hanging around IIC quite a lot as a very young boy. It might have been as close to 1962 as maybe 64 or 65. It just so happened that my uncle used to live across the road, South End Road, in the Lodhi Garden flats, and we used to come here from wherever we were in the country during the summer holidays to spend some time here. And it was always a highlight of the evening that the young kids of the family would go across with, of course, a chaperone, ayah or maid, whatever you call it, over to the gardens. And I was all the time trying to pull this motley group of ragtag bunch of kids through this gate into this complex, and nobody could understand what was my fascination for it, but I didn't know either. But there was something which actually gave me the real experience of a walk in the garden, because yes, there was a building somewhere, but it was so seamlessly integrated with the garden. And even when you walk through it, there was only gardens to be seen. So in some ways, that kind of got embedded in my mind. And then one fine day when I was in college, maybe about 1977 or something, and I happened to design, or rather I happened to draw jali in my elevation for a library building, which I thought I had worked out a very fantastic solution for, books not getting thrown out of the window by people who wanted to steal them. So I put a jali over the entire elevation, and my professor happened to be Vasant Kamath. He told me, well, we are very smart, but there'll be pigeons too. So it was kind of a problem. Oh, yes, there will be pigeons too. So he said that, well, that problem has been solved. Go to India International Center and see it. And I spent a whole day, detailing I saw of this jali here. Very fantastic jolly, nothing comparable I've seen in my entire life since then, in which this whole thing has been worked out with the fire bricks standing vertically on two pipes, and the space between them has got this section of a pipe which does a does a deedle doddle whenever a bird sits on it, and the bird immediately gets upset and flies off and doesn't sit there. And I just thought then that, hey man, this is architecture. This is how I want to be. This is what I want to do. So that was one incident which just stuck to me, and ever since then, India International Center, funny thing is that always appeared to be something where the high and mighty would be hobnobbing. But if you dared to just walk in through any of the gates, and you walk through the lobby and through the stilt area, you would walk anywhere, and it just never seemed that anybody would stop you, and nobody did. I don't know if they do now to young kids who just walk through, but yes, it had that kind of openness. And then one great occasion happened. I never got a chance to see any of the insides of the Indian International Center. And of course, the great thing was that this building always kind of had all its insides outside. I mean, everything was just hanging out for you to see, to absorb, to learn from. And then one day, it just so happened that I had become a faculty at the SPA and had to come and pick up a VIP for a function from here. And I was downstairs. There was no point, sitting in the reception area, because that would be such a waste of time. I was just roaming around as usual, and no mobiles in those days. And then somebody came out looking for me, and he said, "Ki wo aapko upar bula rahe hain." My God, it was like, oh my God, is this really happening? I'm really entering the India International Center, and I'm being called up to the room. And I went up to the room, and what do I notice? Something which all along was my greatest wish. I always wished, why can't we do it like that? And there in front of my eyes it was. And you know what that was? That was a coved skirting. Such a fantastic thing. A coved skirting. So the skirting seamlessly fillets and turns into, the floor turns into the skirting. So wonderful, so easy to clean. I mean, it's just so primordially a response to a problem. What so nicely Stein has said there, that you seek the nature of the solution, or the character of the solution in the nature of the problem. And here was the problem, and it was just saying that this is the way it's to be done. And he went ahead and did that. So ever since, for me, all the time, whenever I'm coming here, I'm not looking at the plan. I'm not looking at the great courtyard in the middle. I'm only looking at the corners, because for me, all the time, this great wonder has only come about because the small things have been done right. So to borrow from one of my colleagues, Stein, Joseph Allen Stein, for an architect, for me particularly, is really the god of small things. Okay, he has just so perfectly done everything throughout his life. And who do I learn all this from? Who do I get to know this from? I'm sorry to say, not from other architects, but I got to know this from the contractors who worked with Stein. And it was always something, when we got into doing some larger projects, the contractors would come and throw us a challenge. Oh, you're giving us drawings. Have you seen Stein office drawings? I would say, no, I haven't. And then they would flip through the drawings and say, आपने ये ऐसे किया है. Stein office में तो इसको ऐसे करते हैं. And that's when you came to know, that, oh my God. Yeah.
On that note, I actually have a lot of the Stein detailed drawings too, but for the sake of brevity and not boring the audience, I didn't include that in my presentation.
Great. Give me a chance.
Yeah, I remember one day we were standing when there was a rainy day at SP recently, and you spoke about the curb.
Yeah. So everywhere, all the time, the
It was the reception desk which had the cove skirting. And during COVID, around that time, they demolished it and they put a.
oh, have they?
It's gone.
Oh my God.
No, no, no.
Central corridor, courtyard we have there, that's been demolished and the Kamla Devi Hall is there.
I would like to, again, for the sake of brevity and time, I didn't go into that. That was the director's residence originally. In subsequent years, the desire was felt for more spaces, and the residential situation in Delhi was no longer the same. So the director's residence was demolished, and the what we now know as the Kamala Devi block was built over there. So that's. I know that's, yeah. So if you look at. So this is what has happened. Yeah.
Okay,
that
there
is
are
the-
there are a lot of changes which have taken place in IISc. Some say that it's not there. Ravi, I want to talk to you about the steel township because he worked in Durgapur, Bhilai, Rourkela, and all those places. I grew up in Rourkela, and he's worked in a lot of places. So have you? Is there an attempt by the, since you're close with the Stein family, is there an attempt to document that architecture and know about it as well? Because there are a lot of places that he's worked.
Well, the thing is that these things are a little hard because he was based in Calcutta at that time when some of those things happened, and he was a professor. He set up a practice with Benjamin Polk and Chatterjee. As an aside, Polk was the one who designed the Jallianwala Memorial, and so it is not clear how much or where a lot of those records are. Perhaps the steel township authorities might have something. So it's not very clear. I don't know if Rahman would be able to say something on this.
Actually, the problem with the projects like those, which are government projects, most of those drawings and designs were kept by government departments. And I don't know what the state of those archives might be now in Bengal and Odisha. I know in Calcutta, it's a slightly better situation because some of the government buildings my father did there, the drawings are still with the PWD in West Bengal. Delhi has been a disaster because most of the drawings and models which were done for all the Delhi buildings no longer exist. So, for those, and many of those buildings in any case have been torn down in the Modi years. My father, not just my father's buildings, but the entire Pragati Maidan complex, which had, 5, 6, 7 major architects, buildings, done from the 1960s into the 1980s. So I think one can investigate in the Bengal archives and see if there's a possibility. I think they retained some of that British tradition of keeping records better than what happened in Delhi.
Yeah, thank you, Ram. I think we spent quite a lot of time talking amongst ourselves. It's time to open up to the audience. Yeah, are there any questions? Yeah, Shrikant, please speak out your name because this is being recorded, and also speak into the mic. Thank you, and please make your questions a little brief so that the people
Okay,
can
yeah.
yeah.
So my name is Shrikant Gupta, and I'm an economist, but my closest encounter with all this is I was director of the National Institute of Urban Affairs, which is probably located in the building that Stein last designed, the India Habitat Center, which obviously Ravi hasn't talked about. But I think just a sort of a parenthetical mention that as I've as an amateur, what I've learned is that this is a building in a garden, and that's a garden inside a building, and that's how it's defined. So it's also an amazing place, and it has the auditorium named after Joseph Stein. So, well, that just a comment. That wasn't a question, and I think this was absolutely a fantastic talk. And I think the comments by Mr. Rahman and Professor Manoj were also fantastic. So that's all. Thanks, Anuj.
Thank you.
Uh,
Anybody else?
I would just like to say that your comments are most appropriate, and each aspect of Joseph Stein's work, not just the project, but different aspects of each project, are worthy of entire studies and perhaps books being written on them. Like, for example, what Professor Manoj Mathur said just now about the details. These are things which will get lost unless they are documented and recorded and talked about. They're eminently worthy, and we as a civilization have this huge weakness of not documenting sufficiently. And I'm going to use this forum to try and embarrass Professor Mathur to say that perhaps he could use his connection to the academia and the world of students to perhaps use that resource to do some of these studies and documentations. Thank you.
We'll get you to IHC for another talk.
Great, thanks. Anybody else? I thought there would be a lot of questions from the audience.
I just want
Please
to
come
say,
to mic.
can I speak?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Sagari Chabra. I'm a writer and filmmaker, and I use ISC a lot. A lot of my work has been done here. And I was so happy to hear it being called a scholarly place and a super university, because that is what it really was envisaged and is. And a lot of people who don't, I don't know whether it's sour grapes or not, but they will call it an elitist place, which it is not. A lot of writers, whether it's Bhisham Sani ji or Nirmal Verma ji, they've written their books there, and you could see that their novels were being made. You know, I mean, there are stories of the waiter will tell me that वो कुछ और आ जाता था, वो कुछ उन्होंने कुछ order किया, कुछ और आता था. They would just eat it without knowing that they've been served something different, because they were so engrossed with what they were writing. I am extreme. Every time I drive here, I express gratitude for this place. Gives me a sense of calm as soon as I come. I call it the last bastion of decency. Here, people are civil, people are decent, and at least in the library, we are working. I don't have a question. I just want to say that having been a member since 1995 and having written many of my books from here, I want it to remain the way it is. I am not for this. I mean, the way Delhi is changing, and you know what was happened with Central Vista and Sarojini Nagar, and the grand design that some people have. I just want to make an appeal that IIC should remain what it is. Thank you very much for an excellent talk.
Thank you so much. Please come to a mic, speak out your name and
my question is that, firstly, I'd like to, okay, my name is, just a sec.
everybody knows Nalin Savara.
My name is Nalin Savara, and I'm a regular at IIC and IHC, partly because of the talks and the kind of public discussions that happen. And I'm a software engineer and entrepreneur by profession. Firstly, thanks a ton, Mr. Ravi Kaimal, for your excellent talk. Totally loved it. It cast light on a lot of things, and I loved Mr. Rahman's sort of anecdotes that he shared. And Professor Mathur, and thank you, Anuj, for everything you're doing. Okay, my question is that where do you get this information? Was that a book you were quoting, or was that information that you collected over a span of time from various sources, or what? Yeah.
Some of those who know me know that I'm an information addict, and I seek out information from lots of sources. So, in the last slide, I had said a bunch of thank yous. There are books, there are interviews, there are online references, social media, and so on. So it's a range of things, and including the family's own records and archives, some of which they very kindly shared with me.
Okay, thanks a ton, Ravi.
Nalin, I'll answer that question a little more elaborately. So that Stein's, there is a book by Stephen White on Stein called Building in the Garden. That's a seminal book. I've had that book for a few years now because I was working in Bhutan, and there I realized that Stein had worked in Bhutan as well. He's worked in Raurkela, Bhilai, Durgapur, but he's worked in Bhutan as well. He's worked in Kashmir. And you must go through that book if you can lay your hands on it. It's a very interesting book and very well compiled.
Okay.
And Ravi has had access to the family's. The family has also donated the entire archives to Cornell University.
Not the entire archives, but
okay.
substantial
Portion of it to Cornell University as well.
Got it.
And if you search YouTube, you'll get a lot of talks and discussions on Stein, by his son, one of his sons.
Awesome. So that was Joseph Stein by Stephen White.
Building in the Garden by Stephen White.
Got it. Thank you
I'll
so
share
much.
that with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Occasional paper at IIC written by somebody on Stein.
Yes,
Online,
there are many. There are many.
The 2004 quarterly of the IIC has an interview, as Ravi mentioned, by Geeti Sen, right? By Geeti Sen. So that's also an interesting. There's a YouTube video by Stein. Stein is being interviewed by Rajiv Mehrotra. That also is. Jaswinder, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to ask. Hi, my name is Nilanjan. Yeah, I've been coming to IIC since 79. Sounds a long time, but I was 10 at that time. I wanted to say this is a lovely talk, very informative. You brought out aspects that we never knew about before, having come here 45 years. And those photographs of the Golden Pavilion were very interesting. Could you tell us more about it, where it was located? And can we see the photos again, please?
No, not at all, Ravi. I'm, my table is booked for 8:30. So I'm.
Well, if they can.
We can show it. We can.
Yeah.
It is located
fountain.
where the amphitheater is now, roughly.
I see.
So the extension, I would imagine the extension they made where you have the Lotus Lounge.
No.
So
No.
possibly it was just a little
No,
beyond
no.
that.
It was basically just beyond this pond. I have no idea. Somebody find out. I have no idea. I have no ideas. There's a mystery. Perhaps somebody could work at it. So you can see the pond in the foreground here. So if you sit in the veranda of the lounge downstairs and you look across, you would have seen this. So this is roughly where the amphitheater is now. But a lovely little, this is inside.
So why did they demolish it?
I have no idea.
If you could show
Somebody find out.
Ravi, if you could just go back to the last slide, please. The one previous to that, where you see that that was the original extent of the building, beyond which they made the block where the Lotus Lounge is on the first floor.
That's on the back.
No, that's
Sorry?
That's on the back. This is towards the amphitheater.
Yeah.
He's right. That's towards. I thought it was in the center of the fountain, but it's a different place.
No, it's beyond the fountain.
I understand that now.
See, that's where it is.
Yeah. You can see it on the plan.
Where?
Where the amphitheater is now.
Can you use the pointer?
Yes.
Have you just pointed to the point? Okay, that's.
Yes.
Well, detective story. So
Very interesting. This would have been taken
Jaswinder,
around
you had a
which year?
question. Sorry.
Which year was this taken, this photograph?
this was taken soon after the early days, in the 60s, perhaps.
Let's see.
Please go ahead. Press the mic. Speak your name.
Yes,
you.
hi, good evening. I'm Jaswinder. I'm a 2006 graduate from School of Planning and Architecture. And we saw S. Radhakrishnan, Sarpalli Radhakrishnan. Again, we celebrate Teachers' Day, and we have so many teachers around us here. And from our college, alma mater only. And my experience is I was doing a research paper in my final year. It was a seminar. So it was about school building. So one of my case study was Lady with College Child Development Center. It was again designed by Stein only. And when I finished my seminar, I went to give a copy of the published work to the department because they had complained that most of the architecture students come and they do their study research and no one turns up and give us something, that whatever work, final work. So I shared that copy, and they engaged me as their architect because during that time only metro was coming out from the basement to the elevated thing just outside the building only. So they demolished certain part of that complex, and I was lucky enough to be a part of that compound. So I did two structure and a beautiful play area for the children, where I added just a mound because that mound was always there, and the children had this memory to associate with the mound. So I aligned that mound from the point where the metro was coming out. So children could see that excitement. So they had that excitement for the metro. They wanted to see. So I just changed the position of the mound. And I still go to the once in a while I go to the place and I still see that activity happening in that space. So that's just the experience I wanted to share with
Interesting.
this. Yes.
Is Ram online still?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay.
School.
Can we go back
Lady
to
with
him because
College.
we can't see him? Yeah. Yes. Please.
Child
Thank
development.
you.
Yeah, is there a question or
No, Ram, I was wanting to ask you if you have anything else to add to what you've said already, or some.
well, in one way, seeing that pavilion, it would be nice if that were reconstructed, maybe in some other site. But it's a wonderful little exercise in conceiving an intimate space. When you look at, I mean, Stein had this incredible tradition of building complicated roofs, paraboloid roofs, etc. And one of the things that he told me, which was fascinating, this I think it was in reference to Triveni, is that even the extensions that he built many, many years after the first building, the price per square foot at the time the new buildings were being built was still the same as in the original. Meaning he was very conscious of keeping prices low, especially for someone like Mrs. Sridharani, who didn't have, enormous resources or Rockefeller money, etc. So this idea of being frugal was very much his, his philosophy, which was the wider Gandhian philosophy of being as practical as one could be in our situation in India.
We come to, we were hoping that David and Ethan will join us, but it appears to be an inconvenient time for them. He was also, ISC was handcrafted here. And he spoke about the ISC later on, and he says that kind of structure that we had, he made the auditorium out of Y-shaped precast blocks here on site. And he says later, at that point of time, the craftsmanship was of a high order. And when he moved to the Fort Foundation, he says that things were not too good. And at that point of time, it became very difficult to maintain lateral and vertical elements. So he said the level of craftsmanship went down. So, what would you say about that? Because did he speak to you about this? Was there a discussion on this issue on the Indian on the standard of the craftsmanship.
Yes, actually, both both my father and Joe, as they were building, they did mention, you talked about Tirath Ram Ahuja, who was a legendary contractor in Delhi for a lot of the modernist buildings. Both of them mentioned that in the late 50s, the karigars, the craftsmen, were hugely skilled. And both architects had enormous respect for the craftsmen and would actually, get their opinion on a certain design issue or a craft issue, whether it was casting the concrete or wooden details, etc. They would listen to these craftsmen. And I think those were craftsmen who had reached a certain stage in their professional life, which was very fine. And they were very concerned about, the craft, the end result of what they were making. And that did change over the years. And you do see that in the buildings. Also, I think it relates also to the contractors, because someone like Tirath Ram Ahuja would be very particular about the quality of the rough material they were using, whether it was, the elements of mixing concrete or the floor tiles that were being used, or even the plumbing, etc. And I think there was a deterioration which frustrated both of them in later years.
In fact, I would like to add to that, that one of the stories that I have heard is that during the making of the IIC, the quartzite stones would be soaked for a few days underwater to see
Yeah.
which ones showed any streaks of iron oxide leaching out. And
Yeah.
those ones would not be used. They would use only the ones where there was no oxidation near the surface and which didn't show any discoloration. So that's the level of attention to detail and the care that used to go into these things. So you would see very few stones, even after 60 years, which show some discoloration because they had taken that care to do the sorting and the checking and so on.
Well, one last, just a last intervention. Both the IIC and Triveni, as an architectural photographer, I had photographed both the buildings in daylight. And it was a few years ago that I realized that actually the best photographs of those buildings are done at night, because you see the light coming through the jalis or that, amazing walkway that was talked about with the fire bricks and the copper tubing. You really see how transparent those buildings are at night. And they absolutely glow from the inside with the light and the, coming through the jalis. So that's another, just an aspect of looking at the building. And any of you who go there in the evening, please look at those buildings with this in mind.
Yeah, that's beautifully expressed, especially at dusk. And one of the drawings that I showed actually mentions the layers in the elevation, in the facade. The elements and the layers which go on to create this. And you have expressed it beautifully. Thanks.
There's another actually detail which came from a photograph, which is the staircase in the residence block, which is towards the driveway, not the one towards the dining room.
The underside of the
yeah, the underside,
right? Beautiful.
look
I just
up
took a
at that
photograph few days
staircase.
back.
Yeah. I
And
didn't
look
include
at
it in the
detail.
presentation. I had those. In fact, occasionally I bring some, let's say, next gen computer natives to show them the staircase, to show that before CAD and 3D modeling and so on, people did such things.
It's a stunning staircase with the detailing of the concrete, the fineness of the material use, and also the detailing of the railing design. And it's a remarkable. So anyone who goes there, please stand at the bottom of that stair and look up.
And also the flooring. If you see the flooring, the terrazzo flooring which is done there is of a totally different color. He used a different kind of material there. I have a photograph of that as well. One thing which Ravi spoke about, and Ram, I want you and Ravi both to come in on this, is that Stein, he found when he came to India, he found it open and inviting. In fact, that's inviting architecture is what he talks about. After escaping McCarthyism in the US, he found that the US was fast, pushy, and money-oriented. So he says that nationalism diminishes us and called himself an earthian. What would he think of India today?
Oh gosh, I think, given
Beyond
that,
IIC now. Yeah.
yeah, beyond IIC. Well, first talking architecturally, people forget that Delhi as a site of architecture, in the sort of golden Nehruvian Camelot years, and not just Nehru, but number of people who were in the bureaucracy and the government and outside the government, like Deshmukh himself, had there was that visionary spirit of that first decade after independence. There was this great hope of the new India emerging, which was egalitarian. And a lot of the young architects who came in the generation after my father, or Korea even. And, one other interesting thing architecturally is that both Kanvinde, Rahman, Pilu Modi, Stein, all trained in the US. Unlike many of the architects, the Indian architects who had trained in JJ school, there were very few schools of architecture at the time, I think 3 main at independence. And that American influence, comes through in their buildings, the American modernism, very different from what happened in Chandigarh with Le Corbusier and his use of the exposed concrete. So Delhi became a center where, there was this mix. There were some people like J.K. Chowdhury, etc., who came out of Chandigarh and did exposed concrete. I mean, remarkable buildings like the IIT in Delhi. But there were others who, combined a different aesthetic, not, huge expanses of exposed concrete. And that experiment of Delhi modernism is really quite stunning in world modernism. And sadly, number of those iconic buildings, I mean, the most iconic would be the Hall of Nations of Raj Rewal, which was 1974, which was a remarkable feat, not just in conception, but also in hand construction. It was a building that could only have been made in India. And it's a tragedy that that was destroyed. And in a sense, the destruction of that building, symbolizes what's happened in the last 20, 30 years in India with how politics has changed. And, a sort of majoritarian nationalism, which was completely antithesis to what the national movement was about, and Gandhian philosophy expressed, by people like Radhakrishnan or Maulana Azad and Nehru, of course. I think Stein would have been very, very shattered, and my father, and I'm happy that both of them are no longer there to see this.
Ravi also mentioned about Varda, and some of the people who inspired Stein were Gandhi, Nehru, and Tagore. So, any conversations that you had with him on this issue, or your father for that matter?
Well, yes, both of them. I mean, the first memorial to Gandhi was designed by my father in Barakpur, Gandhi Ghat, which is where his contact with Nehru began, because Nehru inaugurated that in 1949, 1 year after Gandhi's assassination. My father, of course, had never met Gandhi and had only seen Nehru as a student in Calcutta, speaking from a distance. But my father became very close to Mrs. Vijay Lakshmi Pandit in New York, who became a close family friend. So he had not met Nehru until 1949. So in my father's case, the connection with Nehru was very direct and intimate. I mean, they became good close friends. And Nehru would express his anger, etc., as I told you about Rabindra Bhavan. Joe, I think, was hugely influenced by Gandhian ethics and Gandhian philosophy on a social level, but also on a practical level of, Gandhi's ideas of the village economy. I mean, not being sort of anti-industrial, but being realistic. I mean, Gandhi's whole use of the handloom, fabric in India, etc., and also how Joe used that whole tradition of the handloom in all his buildings, with people like Nelly Setna, Riten Mazumdar, and Margaret Stein was very involved in that. Many of those, furnishings, the fabrics, the hangings, there are these beautiful Riten Mazumdar hangings in the Ford Foundation. And that sort of link with John Bissell and the foundation of Fab India in the 60s. There was a whole tradition of these architects really looking at handicraft. And of course, Joe using the glazed tiles extensively in his building. Again, a response to looking back at the tradition of the Lodhi and Mughal architecture, but particularly the Lodhi with the glazed tile work from that period. And of course, the IIC being right next to the Lodhi buildings, where you can still see remnants of tiles on some of the tombs. So I think for both of them, that ethos and those ethics were hugely important.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ram.
Can I say?
Yeah, please. I
Uh,
think we'll take a little bit of closing remarks from
Okay.
Professor Mathur and you, and then we'll
Since
wind
you
up.
mentioned Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, here is something that I had heard, correct me if I'm wrong. Apparently, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit had spread the word internationally that India was looking for a good architect to head the Department of Architecture at Bengal Engineering College. And Richard Neutra had told her about this bright young man called Joseph Stein. And when she tried to contact him, he had left the US at that time and couldn't connect. But like a story of destiny, he came across this ad while he was in Switzerland, I believe, and then wrote and subsequently got the job and came to India. So is this true? And the second comment is that I don't know if it's okay to tell the audience that your maternal grandfather was also a freedom fighter, and that he had to leave India and go to the US, and there's that Indo-US connection too.
Yeah, well, the Ramlal Bajpayee connection is sort of peripheral. That's a personal connection. But I have heard the Mrs. Pandit story with Richard Neutra. The Nehru family was quite remarkable in its cosmopolitan connections, as were many families in India, like the Sarabhais with Corbusier or Frank Lloyd Wright. But as far as I remember, I think that Joe told me that Neutra had got in touch with him in France and told him about this proposal. And Richard Neutra had actually consulted, had been brought by the Nehru family to India before independence. And Neutra also, when Design magazine was founded in 1957, partly on the pushing of my father, who told Patwan Singh, who was publishing Indian Design and Builder at the time, that he should have more design aspects in Indian Design and Builder. And Patwan said, well, maybe I'll start a new design magazine. And Neutra was one of the people who was recruited along with Walter Gropius to be on the first editorial board. So, that's another aspect of what happens architecturally in the late 50s with this incredible cosmopolitan connection. And I think it's important to remember that connection of people like Bucky Fuller coming to India, Philip Johnson, Isamu Noguchi. Noguchi, of course, was an old relation of Nayantara Sehgal in the late 40s in New York. And Noguchi had designed a memorial for Gandhi, which I think very few people in India know. And the model for that is still lying in the Noguchi Museum in New York. So all these people were in and out of our homes. And I remember having an argument with Bucky Fuller when I was a bratty, smart teenager about in Joe Stein's living room about his Dymaxion theory of the universe, and me countering it with the little bit of quantum mechanics that I knew. So, that milieu was very international, but also very rooted in the culture, the rooted culture of Indian modernism, which covered so many different fields at that time. And I think it was a historic moment in design terms, worldwide.
Thank you so much, Ram. I think we'll just take a closing remark from Professor Mathur. So we are completely out of time. We can carry on the discussion. Okay.
Come back to IIC, to come back to a more local context. We spoke about the reverse cove, which was there, the reception desk in the residential building. I remember that. And after COVID, I found that the reception desk had gone, the reverse cove had gone, which you just spoke about, Professor Mathur. We spoke about the landscape element, which used to be near the amphitheater, which again was demolished to accommodate the block which came up here. But there's one addition to this building which was done, to my mind, somewhat sensitively, was the second floor on the residential building. The residential wing was ground plus one, and they added a second floor to that, which one almost does not notice as what should I say, an intrusion on what was the original concept. They recessed it to the rear. They did not put the rooms in the front. And I almost did not notice it till one day when I met somebody who showed me that it was added. That I thought was done sensitively, not the additions, which is the Kamala Devi block, or the addition here, which removed the pavilion near the amphitheater. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the information. Professor Mathur, closing remarks. So we can go on with the questions after the thing. Also, we have to close now because it's already a book. Yeah, that's each conversation is a book. Professor Mathur.
Just something very, very short, I would say, is that all architects would know that, there is something which is called the CPWD specifications. And in CPWD specifications, when you actually read the specifications of the items, there's a word used in that. And for the longest time, nobody could explain what that was. That word is that you have to do something so and so in a workman-like manner. That's the exact word. In a workman-like manner. So if you want to know what is the workman-like manner, you come to IIC. You can see it all. Everything is done in the real workman-like manner.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you everybody for being here. I think it's been a very, firstly to Ravi Kaimal for taking so much pains. You've seen how much of material he had collected, and he's been working. I think he's been cursing me because I've been. He says you should have done it yourself. I've had to do all the work, despite being junior to me by about 5 odd years. So thank you so much. Thank you, Ram. I think traveling internationally, you're being able to join us for a longish period of time. Thank you so much. I look forward to catching up with you when you're back in India. Professor Mathur, always a guide, mentor, friend. Thank you so much. And thank you for the audience which has left and the audience which stayed back. Thank you so much. I hope you had a good talk, and thank you so much.
Thank you all.
End with a resolution taking Ram's idea forward. That Ram had an excellent suggestion that we should propose that the lost pavilion be recovered or rebuilt.
Definitely, ma'am. I think all the members of IIC need to take it up. Please don't quote me. Thank you.